Hey guys, welcome back to episode 8 of the Up and Up podcast. Uh, almost already been 2 months. That's kind of quite the commitment already, I feel. But today's first topic is reading, and in a sense, we were just discussing a little bit beforehand where I feel for me as a young kid, my parents really were pushing me into reading. I remember in in the summer there was that sticker program or that kind of passport at the local library that
Yeah.
you get filled. I remember I was like, it was kind of being forced by my parents. I remember I hit them with this a few years ago. It was like, yeah, um, it, at the beginning I thought I was winning, like reading all these books and like getting all these stickers, but now they won that I have like a lifelong enjoyment for reading. So um, but then as high school progressed and into university, my reading of fiction, particular or even nonfiction, I read a variety of books, really plummeted. Um, and it's kind of been working on picking it up again in recent years, especially this year. I've already read a few books since we're already early into the year, or in the last half year. It's nice to bounce back.
Yeah, that's good. I feel like for me, I stopped reading fiction entirely after like first year of uni, I think. Um, I had a few classes in uni where I was doing a little bit of fiction reading, but besides that, if it wasn't for class, I wouldn't really read any fiction materials. Um, but I felt as if my nonfiction reading really increased when I got into university, and even outside of classes as well. Um, Doing a lot more nonfiction reading, a lot more biographies and article reading. Just kind of, I think those topics kind of took over my interests far greater than the things that I was reading in high school and as a kid. Um, like obviously when you're a kid, you know, you read a lot of fiction, you read a lot of stories, and then YA fiction and stuff is like still pretty prominent. And those were all things that I was reading in high school. But yeah, these days I find myself really only reading nonfiction or like books of essays and things, like not to sound
Mhm.
completely boring. Um, but yeah, I guess it's it's interesting because I felt like when I was in uh, university, my reading really took a dip, particularly because I didn't have as much time to
Yeah.
read as pleasure. I felt um, so like in high school, okay, you like get home from school, you have nearly infinite time, right? Like I have from 3 o'clock until like 6 a.m. the next day to read books because I don't sleep. So it's
Mhm.
like perfect. But in university, I was like, oh, like sometimes I'll have classes from like 9:30 in the morning and then like sporadically throughout the day until 10 at night. I was like, okay, so now I only have like 11 at night until 6 a.m. to read, which is like, okay, granted that's still a lot of time, but I was doing a lot of other things, adulting things, learning how to survive. So like I definitely feel as if the amount of time that I could spend reading was really strongly diminished. And then at the same time, like I don't know if you guys had this in elementary school. We went to different elementary schools,
Yeah.
but we always had like time just set aside to do reading.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and
I
so
feel
like I felt like I got a lot of good reading in during that like 1 hour block of just like, oh, every day it's like a dedicated 1 hour. I sit down with whatever book of my choice and I like just read.
I feel like a lot of other elementaries had that, but then the elementaries I went to maybe had like 15-minute thing for 1 week where it's like drop
Man,
and read or whatever.
Really?
Yeah, and I remember like when
15 minutes.
my mom went, I think, to your high school or like was a counselor at your high school, and then she's like, yeah, like you just have almost an hour or so to just drop and read. And it's like I didn't have that experience.
I don't know how long my block was, but it was a decent chunk of time. But like I really remember it because the school would play like classical music and
Mm.
we'd read at the same time. So as a kid, I was like, "Damn, this is kind of fancy," you know?
Yeah. I, I really, I don't know. I kind of enjoyed that. I think the structure of it was something that really kind of forced me to get in some reading every day. Whereas these days, I feel like there might be some days that I don't read at all, like from a book. Okay, I read articles every day, and like particularly news and a lot of editorials and things like that. I read every day, but there's some days where I'll sit down and not read from a book for the entire day. Whereas back, when we were kids, I would definitely be reading from a book every single day. Um, and so I don't know, a lot of my reading today gets done in like binge chunks. We talked about binging, but yeah, like if a book is really compelling, I'll like sit down for like one whole day and I'll just like binge through it and like okay, spend 8 hours in the day just reading it. Um, Whereas before it was definitely more of like a oh yeah, like
Okay.
on my bookmark in, come back the next day.
I want to connect to that where earlier you were saying, oh, this is how much time I have after classes till I wake up or whatever.
Yeah.
So are you? Sounds like you're predominantly a nighttime reader.
Mm,
Uh, well, you did say you have like the class ones or the school ones rather, which is during the day.
yeah.
But there are those windows between classes where I could have read a book, pass the
Yes.
time. I've just I guess chose a um different
Yeah.
method to pass the time in those if I'm not
So
doing homework.
in university, yeah, I mainly spent those times in between classes to like class readings, not reading for
Hmm.
pleasure.
Yeah.
That was like a lot of that time, or even just walking
Uh,
like home and to
yeah.
school in the snow. It's like 25, 30 minutes each way. Spend
I,
a lot of time just trudging around.
I find that for nighttime reading, I like almost Pavlov myself to when I start reading, I get tired. So I like gotta to start throwing it during other blocks in the day to kind of break that
Mm,
um structure. So I'm just like, oh, I open a book, gone.
yeah.
But also there's like the problem with nighttime reading that I also found that when it's a really good book and I want to read all of it,
Mhm.
I'm just like, damn, oh, it's already 3 in the morning. I really should put the book down and get some sleep so I'm not a zombie the next day.
Yeah.
So it's like the struggle uh, between finishing the book as soon as possible because I don't know, I want to know what happens next versus getting that sleep. I already do every day. No, but
Yeah.
uh,
I,
but
I sorry. Go
no, no,
ahead.
you go, you go.
I feel like I'm not particularly a night reader, but just so happens that most of my free time is at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like
Yeah, fair enough.
when I was a kid, I would read before dinner time, like that. I think that chunk between like 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, where it was like, oh, um, like my parents aren't gonna make me start doing my homework yet. Usually that's like an after dinner thing, so it was like a good chunk if like I wasn't doing anything after school. I come home and then I would like read for a few hours and then like have dinner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so before, I think I did a lot of reading during the daytime, honestly. Whereas in high school and then later on, um, yeah, I tended to do more reading at night. Nowadays, I read kind of whenever. If I don't
Whatever.
have work during the day, sometimes I'll read during the day, if not at night. Um, but no, for me, reading doesn't really make me. I don't really have that nighttime reading get tired thing.
We're kind of like the definition of reading. I think we're kind of making the assumption that we're talking about fiction or I guess nonfiction reading because I was discussing with my mom where she's like, "Oh yeah, you guys do like a bunch of reading on your phone." I'm like, "I never read on my phone." She's like, "Not books, but you're on
Yeah.
Reddit or like articles or editorials or whatnot." And she's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, you're actually doing like a lot of reading." And I was thinking, okay, yeah, there's actually a lot more reading that I do of reading words. It's just not a book or primarily fiction because when someone says, "Oh, reading," I think of a fiction book, novel.
Mm.
So uh, it is a larger scope definition to the word that I kind of ignore, um, which I shouldn't. Right? There's a lot of words there that I'm intaking. Right? I remember in high school, for example. Oh yeah, I wasn't reading books, but I'd have these kind of Wikipedia deep dives. I know how people have like the two rabbit holes. For me, it was Wikipedia. I'd like, oh, this is interesting. Opened a new tab, I'll get to it. And then like as I'm scrolling down the article I'm reading right now, oh, I'm done with this article. There's somehow 15 new ones, and then rinse and repeat. So there's I gained a lot of knowledge that way, but I wouldn't consider I didn't consider it reading, I guess, even
No,
though
I
that's
definitely
all it is.
like relate to that, right? Because
Mhm.
like with I guess like the digital age now, like we technically do a lot more reading
Yeah.
if you would like define it as looking at words.
Mhm.
But for me, it's always from a book or like an ebook or whatever like that I would define as reading or um a journal article for school or something. Just I think for me it's something that's like a defined piece of writing. I would, you know, kind of see it
Interesting.
as reading.
So what about like internet publications or like news, like that? Would you consider all of that reading then? Because it's like it's a separate piece that was written and then potentially edited and then
Yeah,
published, like
I'd probably say
even
like
though it's
reading a
online.
news article is reading.
Okay,
Uh,
so I read like these days I read a lot of CBC articles on like online, and then
Mhm.
I read the Richmond News a lot. That's like a great one. I like being in touch with my local news, so I like to read articles on the Richmond News and CBC and things like that. Um, but besides that, I think a lot of my morning reading comes from like sports websites. So usually I'll just like every morning I'll check out what's going on with the NFL. Like I'll read all the NFL news, like everything that's written about kind of from that day. Um, and so I do get a lot of article reading in that sense and a lot of news reading in. Um, so I do think though that digitally it has shifted kind of the way that we read because now
Mhm.
it's like okay, honestly I never read the news before. Even like okay, granted yes, before news went digital I was a kid, but still like um, I would never pick up a newspaper to read. But now
You're like,
news
I'm
is
just
phenomenally accessible and I think it's so much more enjoyable for me. I have like a routine where every time, every morning when I get up, I can read through the news. I like, check out all my different news sites. And so, in that sense, like we're we're saying digitally, you know, even though you're not reading from a book, perhaps you are doing more reading than before. So, like, I don't know, in every morning, I probably read about 30 minutes of news articles just from that morning. So, it's like a good 30 minutes of reading that I clock every day.
I also have kind of a morning routine. It's kind of funny that you said that you didn't read from the newspaper. I'm actually almost the opposite, where I there was just a newspaper on the counter when I got home. So I
Oh,
just like
really?
when I'm eating my snack after school or whatever, like eating a fruit or chips, I just open, flip through it, see what's up. Nowadays, um, or then like one of my internships, I remember that the first like 10-15 minutes, I was like not in the mental to work from the commute, so I just pop open like MSN News or whatever and just see what's happening.
Mhm.
But nowadays, or I think about the last 2, 3 years, especially after like COVID had like 24/7 everything's news. I was like, damn, I'm gonna drop the news. I don't think it's like great for my mental. Worrying about everything all the time, and I definitely do think so far I've made the right choice. Sure, I've lost a little bit about the happenings of the world, but the loss of that was a huge like mental gain. I just not worried nearly as much, not stressed, not that I was like particularly stressed, but it's not even sitting at the back of my head anymore. So I
Mhm.
like don't take in almost any form of news. But I do have that morning routine of there's a few key subreddits, like 4 or 5 that I'll peek if there's anything new. One of them is my local city, Vancouver one, right? See if
Mhm.
anything is happening, and just some of the sports or esports I follow, and
Yeah.
then a few minutes up during bed, and then get out and start the day.
I think overall, at least for me, like my my reading level or amount of reading comes in like moods. Depends on my mood and phases. Because like
Hmm.
I think throughout childhood and even up to now, like I do read regularly, I would say, but like still like ups and downs on like how much I read that month or that season. Uh in uni, I think I actually read a lot more just because I had so much time on my commute that like
Okay.
I'm just consuming whatever I could find on the bus instead of like because like okay, before I didn't have a lot of data, so I would just download a book and read it. And then even after I got like data and like Netflix downloads and all that, like I still kind of stuck to it. Or if I was like late on my class readings, then I'd read that. And I kind of realized that I just like reading in general. Doesn't matter like what it is as long as it's engaging. Because I found myself actually looking into more like of the topics that I was learning in school, like with like crib and all that,
Yeah.
because it was just interesting, like sources of
Hmm.
information, I guess. So and nowadays, like I have this I wouldn't say book club, but it's just like I kind of read the same book as one of our mutual friends, and then they're like mystery books, so we read up to a point and then we discuss and stuff like that. Pretty interesting, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's really nice. I think the idea of book clubs or having someone to discuss the same book with is like it's interesting. Um, if it's something that you're both very uh, interested in reading, then the discussion can be very fruitful. Like um, any sort of media, if you are passionate about it, it will foster great discussions, and that can be like definitely a great avenue to read something interesting. Um, I have not ever participated in a book club, but when I was doing my master's, the people in my cohort, we would always kind of share books and things like, oh yeah, you should take a look at this, take a look at that. It's kind of interesting, and especially since we're all in the same program, it's like we know who similar things would interest us, and so sharing books in that way is, I think, a really great way to expand kind of your reading horizons as well, because most of the time it's a recommendation coming from someone else. So that's really cool. I don't know. We should start a book club.
I,
Yeah,
I was
I'm
actually
down.
thinking of like a book club a while ago
Yeah.
when like a year ago or so. I wrote it like, oh, how can because we're all stuck online, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, all we do is like play games, but we don't really have. So I was like, oh, like trivia was one of them, right? But then another note I wrote for myself was like, oh, book club, right? That's something that because I think as a kid I like saw like references to book clubs in media and whatever, and I was like, sounds kind of lame. I
I mean,
definitely
it's an old
understand it
person thing,
now
right?
as
It
an
sounds like
adult, like the more compelling reason to want to have when you connecting with like people about first of all you're socializing and
Yeah.
you're reading. So it's like I definitely see a lot of it now compared to as a kid where I didn't have those perspectives. But uh, like similarly, uh, I did uh, like this crime fiction, this Scandinavian or Nordic crime fiction course in my fourth year,
Mm.
where it's effectively a book club, right? We're reading a book and we're discussing it, and yeah, it was really good. Also, crime fiction is a great little genre. Someone's thinking of checking out a book genre. Have some recommendations. Some very like easy to reads, but pretty fun. And you're kind of playing detective in those, so
Mm.
that's always enjoyable.
Yeah.
But I feel that for I do something similar when I consume media, like be it a book, a movie, a TV show. It's like, oh, it's instead of having to do the hard work of finding someone who's also interested in all that, I just like boot up Reddit, boot up the subreddit, and see like what people are saying. And there
No,
you go.
I do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, these are the people that enjoyed it, right? So it's like I did too. So that's why I'm here. Especially like after I finish like
Do you
something all
ever
the
like
way.
see like let's say you enjoyed something,
Mhm.
right? You go to the Reddit or you go to like r/movies or whatever,
Yeah.
and you just see people just shitting on it on the comments like, what the heck? Did we watch the same thing? Like, am I that out of touch or something?
Just, like, I definitely see like people with differing opinions sometimes, or sometimes I'm like I didn't see something. So when someone's like completely shitting on it, it does kind of make me think deeper about it or open my eyes to why they see. But sometimes it's like, I think this person's kind of wild in with their take. But other times it's
Yeah.
like, I can see where they're coming from. Like, oh, in hindsight or analyzing it now. Uh, Also love the memes. I think that's one of my favorite parts after I finish like a new series. You can really get some really well developed memes that you can now understand.
Yeah. So you do that with books as well, though.
Yeah, one of my favorite um, book series, probably my favorite book series, called like The Ranger's Apprentice. It's like young adult, like late teens, mid teens book
Mhm.
series. So I didn't ever go and like a month ago. I was like, damn, I've never been to this subreddit. So I found like a great collection of memes that you had to have read most of the books to fully understand and appreciate. And I was like, wow, this I was missing some of these in my life.
That's cool. I don't think I've ever really done that.
Mm.
I've never really gone to a subreddit for a book or a series. Um, except for like I don't know D&D stuff. I guess
Yeah,
those are books too.
Yeah.
true, true.
But like yeah, I think the majority of subreddits I visit have to do with other forms of media or sport. Um, I didn't even know that. Like, I guess that makes sense. There's a subreddit for everything.
Everything, yeah.
Like, that's not something that I would have thought of to
Mm.
go to. You know, yeah.
Something that so there's all these books where if you ever go to like book recommendations or I feel like if you've seen enough book recommendations, you'll start seeing some books like appear again and again.
Mhm.
Many of them being considered, quote unquote classics. Um, so especially the last 2 years, I was like, damn, I'm not really sure what I want to read. Especially like during COVID time. So I was like, oh, there we go. This is the perfect time. Now I'm an adult. I know my dad for a few books. He's like, yeah, you can't read it yet. Like you just won't get an appreciation for it. You're just not gonna enjoy it. So it's like,
Mhm.
okay, like fair enough, I'll wait. But then some of them were written so long ago. I don't know if you guys read Catch 22. I read it, I think
Yeah.
2020. Is my perfect way. I really enjoy reading in the sun. So it's like during COVID, during like the summer or even any day there was sun, I just like go out to my garden, like put a towel or whatever, and then just read in the sun for a little bit,
Oh, that's nice.
just to get some vitamin D
That's, yeah.
breaks sitting in front of a computer all day. But then reading Catch 22, it's such an old book, and I think
Yeah.
you had to kind of have an understanding of how the world was when there was like a lot more wars in it, for example, uh, to kind of appreciate it. So I read it. It was a good book, but I think it didn't connect with me the same way it connected with my parents. Um, or recently, I tried reading
Don
one
Quixote.
of Leo Tolstoy's book, like
Oh
one of
yeah.
those like deep philosophy ones, and it's like two things have. I didn't manage to like finish it. I only got a few chapters in, but there are two things that kind of hurt me, and I don't hear your opinions on this. Was one, this was sure it's a translation, but I don't know. The translator used my English level is not going to increase substantially, I feel, unless I like do something about it. But there were pretty much every 2, 3 sentences, there was a word I've never seen before. So
Mhm.
it's like, it's definitely hurting my enjoyment where I'm like, I think I understand what the word or like the gist of the sentence, but a word every once in a while, okay, not a problem. But if it's every like few sentences, what am I supposed to do? Like,
Yeah.
am I supposed to find the definition for each one? Am I supposed to just say fuck it unless I don't think I get the gist of the paragraph? So I was kind of struggling with that, where it was way more than I've had before. And then I guess this I know for classics and stuff, like the starts are slow. I find that for a lot of books, even books I really enjoyed, like I read Lord of the Rings, but the first time I read it, I barely got through the like Bilbo's party or whatever, like the first 2 3 chapters, and then I put the book away. It took me another year, and I was like, oh, I already read that part, skipped it, and okay, now I got good. Um, so I feel like the slow starts, and in this case, it was the like hard or high level vocabulary that was pushing me away.
Yeah.
What would you do in my shoes?
I think in terms of vocabulary, that's something that it's very evocative of as a kid, how the teachers were always like, "Oh yeah," like every time you come across a word you don't know, like open up the dictionary and find it and
And it's
like
good, I
read it.
think, for
And
like
yes,
kids.
exactly. As a child, that's
Yeah.
fine. But honestly, by the time you've become an adult, and okay, I obviously I didn't see the book you were reading, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt and say that these words were very difficult. It's like I know you and you have a command of the English language, so uh, I can only assume that they're pretty, it's pretty arcane language.
Hmm.
So um, I I feel as if that's uh, it does serve to hurt the enjoyment. If you were reading for pleasure, then you want it to be a pleasurable experience, right?
Yeah.
The language used is obviously going to be a big part of that. Um, but I think if you were like, and especially with those types of books too, though, if you are reading it like specifically to learn, then perhaps it's uh, more of a fruitful exercise to do something like that, where you go back and scour the dictionary for every single word.
Yeah.
Um,
I downloaded a dictionary app and I was like, oh, like put
yeah,
the phone on the thing. I was like, oh, checking. It's like, okay, I understood the word, but I'm doing this like more than I'm doing the reading. I'm
yeah,
not like falling into the book.
yeah. Like for me, I don't enjoy that type of reading, but I particularly don't enjoy that type of writing,
Mhm.
um, especially for topics or subjects that are uh, already complex. If you
Yeah.
further complicate it by using such language, then it can really impact the readability. So, as someone who does a lot of writing, I feel as if that's it's kind of ineffective unless you're really kind of a high horse. Oh, I know more than you type of bastard. But
Mhm.
like, fuck that shit. That's dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah. Josh, what do you think?
Um, yeah, no, I think, like you said, sir, like if it's like one or two every, couple of minutes, and like you can kind of get the meaning, and like occasionally you have to check the dictionary, like, oh, I actually don't know this word, then it's fine for me. But if it's becoming a chore and where it's actually inhibiting my like understanding of the text, like there's really no point in continuing to read it
Mhm.
unless oh, I will do my research of this topic, increase my vocabulary later on in life, and I'll come back to this because I know it's enjoyable. Like, I don't see a point in
Well,
doing so, right?
I feel like this would be the like practice of increasing my vocabulary later in life by reading things I don't see in
It would,
common.
but at this point, like you're kind of taking this book um for like entertainment, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like shifting
Yeah.
its purpose almost. Yeah,
Like if you were to use it as this practice, then it's no longer entertainment. You're just learning,
learning. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
That's
sorry, we're recent. You can go first. I'll.
sure.
Yeah.
I was going to speak on the slow starts.
Mm.
Um, for me, a lot of times, if a book starts really slow, and it's not like okay, for books that are like stories even, honestly, sometimes I just jump into the middle of it. Like I'll just skip ahead and then I'll like
Yeah.
go back and read it if it's like really boring. Because then if I read the intro and it's boring, and then I read the middle and it's also boring, then I don't want to read
What's
the
the
book.
point? Yeah.
So like I'll jump ahead, and if the middle's boring too, then I just won't read the book. I'll just put it down.
Yeah.
I like why suffer through the intro if the middle's not going to get any better? So I don't. And like okay, I'm not the person who cares that much about like spoilers. I'm not one
Yeah.
of those people who needs to be like, oh, like no, like don't tell me anything about anything. Like I'm fine if I hear something, it's fine. I'll figure out how it happens along the way. Like that's a very, I don't know. I was told by a professor once that that's like a very ancient Greek way of seeing suspense. Is like, oh, it doesn't matter if you like know what's gonna happen or not. It's about seeing how it happens. And like, so for me, going and delving into the middle or even the end of the book. Sometimes I'll just read the end to be like, oh wow, like that's like a really great ending to a book, and then I'll go back and just like read the whole book.
I,
So
I see something like pretty similar when I used to go like the library. My parents would go after school to the library to stop at the library, pick up some books or whatever, like as kids. And I was just like to find out if I want to read a book, I'd like, okay, the cover, the title, whatever. And then I'd open up the last 2 pages and just read them. And
yeah,
I know nothing, like you said, because it's kind of like you popping it open in the middle, but I like push it all the way to the end. I'm like, does the last 2 pages sound good? Does it sound like, damn, I want to know how we got here?
yeah,
And then my like sister, I guess, who um is more spoiler like
mm,
alert, she'd be like, how could you just ruin a book like that? Like I'm like, it's not ruined if it's good. Like I'll get to it
yeah,
just because I know how, like, what happens is how it happens. That actually really does remind me of, again, like Nordic crime fiction, where I remember the first chapter was them just like describing the crime, right? And then the rest of the story is like figuring out who done it.
mhm,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for like mysteries though, like I
Mm-hmm.
definitely feel mysteries is like one genre that I wouldn't want to go to the end because
Mm.
then you are kind of
Yeah.
defeating the purpose. But like everything else, yeah, sure, I can see how you guys are living
yeah.
with yourselves.
But no, but even like the idea of the mystery, um, like I feel as if that's definitely a genre where they mostly take time to outline the steps to which how someone figures it out, right? Like it kind of does start at the end with again like similar to crime, right? Like a lot of mystery and crime, overlapping themes and tropes and things like that. um you kind of what happened at the start, but then you uncover everything about how that happened throughout the book. And so like obviously I guess if you read kind of directly from the middle or at some kind of random point, yes, you may encounter something that you wanted to perhaps see in a chain of events. But the idea of like if a book has a slow start, I feel like mysteries don't have slow starts. It's kind of
No,
Yeah.
it's like nuts to
they
butts
hit
from the
you with
start.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it's like
you know
okay,
someone like for example dies,
yeah,
and
exactly. Like
Yeah.
it
Drogot,
starts.
yeah, exactly. So, but for any other type of book, I feel as if it's like, for me, it's totally fine to start reading from the middle and then go back to the introduction. And like some books, I'll read from the start and then get to the middle and then be like, you know what, this is terrible. I'll like skip right to the end, like, and just jump around through the book. Sometimes I'll read the end and be like, oh, actually, I guess this book's like the end is worth it. So like I'll start
Yeah.
again, Um, but I think that type of fluid, like free style of reading is, perhaps not something everyone's interested in. I know a lot of people who like to read a book, just cover to cover and exactly how it was written or perhaps intended. So I can see both sides of it, but I definitely prefer the former. Just kind of do whatever you want with it. It's like
It's
it's
for
my
your
book.
enjoyment, right? We do.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
how you wanna do it.
yeah.
Don't knock someone else's enjoyment. But so that leads me to two things. I'll say the one more relevant is personally I do prefer cover to cover, but that's just because not to toot my own horn, I feel like I read incredibly fast. So
Mhm.
if it is a slow start, it's technically not that slow for me, right? Um, but yeah, like, so first question is how do you guys like to read? Like, do you take your time with it, or would you say you also are a fast reader while maintaining like decent comprehension, right? And then number two was it you recently? Sorry, that you said
Yeah.
you got a copy of Don Quixote.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you been starting it?
So I started it.
Yeah.
I read like the first few chapters. I had a good time, but I just returned it actually like just the other day because it's a really big book, and I feel like I wasn't making the time for it. And even though I enjoyed it, I wasn't kind of creating space for it. I was like, I was thinking, I didn't get to come to a conclusion, but I was thinking, oh, why is it that I'm not putting more time towards something that I have the time and I did enjoy it? Like, so why am I not putting time towards it? And also, it's from the library, right? So there's a deadline. I could renew it and all that, but it would have been not this round. So I was going to touch up on that, but I don't know.
Did you? Sorry, Josh. Did you have like an additional question there
For which one?
about Don Quixote?
Oh,
Like,
no. I was
you
just
just
No.
wanted to ask Star
Yeah,
about?
yeah,
I just
Okay.
wanted to ask her how it's going.
Okay.
Because, like, we
Yeah.
haven't talked about that in a while.
yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to read that for a class, first
Oh,
year class at university, but it's a very classic story.
Well, then,
Anyway.
then we've all read it except for Star.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
True.
can talk about the first like 5 chapters.
Yeah. Book club.
I
Anyway,
did not finish book 1.
Keep on going. You
Yeah.
got tons of time, bro.
Okay, so this is kind of weird. So I was like talking to my mom about exactly this is the book of the month for me.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, it's pretty heavy. It's kind of like, and so it is a little bit more of a hassle to read. I'm like, oh, I'm I'm shilling for myself to just get one of the crystal ink displays or whatever, the e-readers,
Yeah.
where they kind of look like a book page versus the tablet. Because I'm not the biggest fan of reading from tablets, especially at night. I
Mhm.
feel like their lowest brightness is still way too bright.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of the e-readers, even though I don't have one. But I really do like, maybe it's just a random like boomer thing, but I really like the smell of books. Like, I don't know if you guys ever smell books, but it's actually like a very particular smell. So I'm like, I'm just
Yeah.
reading. It's like the books in my face, and then I'm just like, take a big old sniff.
Yeah. I think it's the type of paper they use, because they don't
Mhm.
use like, regular
Yeah,
printer paper or whatever, right? It's like it's that specific type of paper
yeah.
that has that aroma. Yeah.
But then,
I'm
It's the
yeah,
sorry.
paper and the ink, and
Yeah.
also like how much it's been used, right?
Yeah.
but then
I'm
all night.
definitely
Oh, go.
I'm definitely a print guy. Like
Yeah,
I can't really read PDFs. I've always just printed everything to read for like all my school courses and everything. Like I would print everything. And then also I can't read light text on dark backgrounds. We've been over this a
no,
lot.
that's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, I know. Because I have my Discord in light mode, and everyone roasts me for it because I can't read white text on a dark background. It's like very hard on my eyes.
Yeah.
So I
If you have
always read dark text on light, which lends itself to paper reading.
if you have Discord, change it to light mode just to see what kind of animal Kyle is. But
That's like the
anyway,
default, though, isn't it? Isn't light
No,
mode the
Ye-
default?
No,
not
no.
anymore. It used to be,
Yeah.
but then
Okay,
they're like,
so
wow,
then
80+% of our like user base or something like uses dark mode. So
okay. Well,
I'm
those
pretty sure
people
you use light mode for most
are
of your things, don't you?
I use light mode for anything text involved.
Yeah.
I use dark mode for most things that are picture or video involved. So like YouTube is in dark mode
mhm,
because I don't need to read anything for YouTube. Like Instagram is in dark mode because it's mainly
yeah,
just
pictures.
pictures. But for anything that I'm reading a lot of text, it's all in light mode. Yeah. But anyway, sorry to answer your question from before, Josh. I also read pretty quick. So I do feel as if like I have a good. I mean, you kind of have to learn to read really quickly if you're going to be doing a lot of heavy reading, which like, for grad school I really had to do. I was already a pretty quick reader before that, but I think my reading speed even increased after doing that. It's like, okay, I need to do 300 pages of reading before my next class. It's like, okay, it's pretty much, you got to get through it. And
Chop
like
chop.
3 classes, okay, yeah, it's like I'm reading some crazy amount of pages every week. It's like just really got to sit down and be able to grind that out. While obviously being able to retain that. If not, what am I doing here? Looking at the words, not really reading. But kind of to relate that back to the slow start, which you also talked about. For me, a slow start isn't necessarily like slow time wise, but it's like boring,
Mhm.
And even if I could get through it really fast, if I think the beginning of a book is really boring me, I won't be compelled to continue. And like that's when I end up reading slower and slower. 'Cause, like sometimes if it's really boring, I'll end up defaulting to that. Like, yeah, I'm just glazed over, just looking at the words, and like I'll like regain consciousness. Oh my god, like
Oh, shit.
what did I just read? Like I go back and read it again, and so like that kind of slows it down. That's not, I don't know. That's not enjoyable, right? So
Hmm.
even though I read fast, I feel as if books that start slow are still not particularly interesting to me.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
I found that for the like bigger books too, I'm constantly like turning in bed trying to find like how do I read this I can't just hold it above my head because it's 1,000 pages. So I gotta like, oh, I'm reading the left side of the book, so I'm like facing left or whatever, and then oh, next page, rotate right, and it does cause a little bit of problems in terms of um you are kind of battling that. I don't know. I think in the near future I'll probably get one of the e-readers and see how
I
that
feel like it's
goes.
a good investment.
You have one?
Yeah.
Do you have one, Josh?
No,
Oh,
I wouldn't mind, but I
yeah.
don't also mind reading on my phone, for example.
Okay, yeah.
But that also, like you said, I don't read at night then
Mm,
because
that's right.
obvious
Yeah.
reasons. But yeah, with
Blended.
that, we're gonna take a little break and we'll come back
Yeah.
with the same
Shorter
topic probably.
topic. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, welcome back to the Up and Up podcast after our break. So we're actually going to continue on the topic of reading because we got a little bit engrossed in it, and I think it's still a really good topic, and we all have still a little bit to talk about. So coming back in, actually, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is something that we kind of started recently as a group, and that's playing D&D. Like a few of us had played D&D before, but uh, recently us and a few of our other friends started playing again. Um, and for me, I hadn't played D&D in like years since I was a kid. And since it's like on a completely new edition now, I ended up having to do a tremendous amount of reading to actually like get back into it and understand the game systems and things like that. And so um, that was something that I think has been taking up the majority of my reading time in the last few months. Because right when like we started to get back into it, um, I was reading these books for like several hours a day, just like going through everything like cover to cover, like flipping back to things to reference them. Um, and I think it's super interesting because like board games and tabletop games in general are, they're particularly reading heavy endeavors. Like I'd say a video game is not a particularly reading heavy form of media. Neither is, TV or film, right? But in terms of interactive media, board games and tabletop games especially have so much more reading to them. And I think that's just it's such an interesting facet of these games where the prerequisite almost is a certain amount of reading. And so I had been kind of I got a new excuse really to start reading just an insane amount of material. And I suppose this would probably count as fiction, I suppose, because
Yeah.
it's like created worlds, created settings, and I guess some of that is rule sets and different things like that. But for anything that is like, setting based or different adventures and things like that. That's all someone else has written it as a a story, a fictional story, and although it's interactive, it's still reading. Um, and so, kind of following that vein, then, what do you guys think about this type of reading? Reading kind of either rule sets or like interactivity things, and then kind of further than that, like something I used to read a lot as a kid were choose your own adventure books. And so, like, what are your thoughts kind of on all of this style of reading?
Hmm. I think I haven't come across it too much, but with my own reading into like how like the rule sets, like I do enjoy it because it seems almost the same as like SAR's Wikipedia rabbit hole thing, where
Yeah.
I find something interesting. I'm like, oh, this isn't for my class, but I'll just take a look at it anyways. And
Hmm.
then I keep on going from there. But at least from like a personal or a previous kind of experience that I've had is I really enjoyed reading video game manuals.
Mm.
Um, because back then they video games actually came with
Yeah.
decently thick manuals, and the stuff inside where they even told you like little tips and tricks on how to play the game. Like I enjoyed reading that kind of stuff, and even though I would never remember it or like it was kind of useless, it was still like a pretty interactive form. Like, oh yeah, like this is something I could do in real life, but you know.
Hmm.
I feel like what was your question in that regard?
I
Because
I think it was more just like, do you have thoughts about um, this type of reading? That's not it's not
yeah,
really reading a story, and it's not really reading nonfiction.
because I actually found myself in a very similar situation when I was picking up DMing like a few years ago. It's just exact same things. Like, oh, I'm the go-to person that's supposed to know all the rules, so I better pack up all the rules in my head. So I found
Hmm.
myself, opening the books at night in bed, reading them sometimes, and yeah, really like delving into the topic. So there's so much reading. You kind of just want to have a quick pickup of the entire book into your head. So worst case, you know where to look for reference. So
Yeah.
uh, it it is a lot of reading, and just so you kind of have the bookmarks in your head. But it's really enjoyable because, like you said, it's somebody else's story. Uh, just because they're rules doesn't mean they're not. It's not the same way as in rules of a board game where, oh, this is how you do your turn. Not that that's like a, not a good kind of reading as well, right? Because when you play board games, it's very similar where someone's like, oh, well, what's the rules here? So if you did that, you'll also be able to either know a reference.
Hmm.
But that I was thinking a little bit when you're speaking that, oh, as a kid, you just thought there's, fiction and nonfiction. And this kind of tips tiptoes the line where some of it's fiction when reading a campaign or something that's someone's entire, fictional story that you're
Hmm.
gonna have your friends navigate through. But also all the rules are entirely nonfiction, I guess they're,
Yeah.
you or I guess you could argue they're fiction because it's not real. But um yeah, I think it's a pretty unique topic to or genre almost to read, but s- I definitely found myself when I was really into the subject matter, just so easily immersed and found it so easy to just flip the next page.
I think like with you two having experience with DMing and reading this, like it also gives you a bit more, I guess, perspective and also like freedom to on how you interpret what you're reading, right? Because you could also like they're not concrete rules. Some of them
Mhm.
are, I guess. But
Yeah.
like most of the time, you're like, oh, how do I fit this into my campaign? Or like if
Mhm.
this situation arises with my players, like how do I, you know, amend it?
Yeah. What about the choose your own adventure books? You guys ever read those as
Yeah.
kids or adults, I suppose?
But
As kids, definitely. Yeah.
I think I picked up one Choose Your Own Adventure in grade 4. I still remember there was like a tiger on the cover. And I was like, what is this wacky ass book? How do I know when to go to the next page? I like nearly
Kelsey,
immediately
bro.
dropped it. It did not last more than 15 minutes in my hands. I
Yeah.
was like, this is too bonkers. I don't know
What?
who's this crazy. Like, I think I wasn't open to it. I was pretty close minded in terms of how books
Mm,
should be. Like
yeah.
nowadays, I'd definitely be more, oh, it's like I'm interacting with the book, not being, told by the author what's happening.
Mhm.
So it's like back then I was not ready for it. I think nowadays I feel like I've never heard of an adult choose your own adventure. Just my life is a choose your own adventure, I guess. But
They should have choose your own adventure books for adults. That'd be great.
yeah.
Yeah. But
I'm
like,
sure
okay,
someone's written
when you
something.
guys read those books, right? Or
Mhm.
when you read them, like would you 100% them?
Yeah.
You have to, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
don't
You want to know all the
Always.
endings?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I don't think
Mhm.
I know a single person that would just read it once, be like, all
That was
right,
good. Yeah.
I reached the end. We're good, right?
Yeah. Like if I didn't end up reading every single page of the book, like at least once, I didn't get my full book experience. It's like
Mm.
okay, it's like a visual novel, and I
Yeah,
suppose visual novels
exactly.
like based on the choose your own adventure style.
Yeah.
That's like pretty much it, right? Like you want to see every possibility, and so yeah, I would like
Are
I
those
would
adult
through and like
choose your adventure books then? Visual
Yeah,
novels?
I guess they
yeah,
are.
yeah, that's true.
Kind
Yeah,
of degenerate, but yeah.
read through it, get to the like I don't know bad ending, like oh I died, like go back to the
Ew.
start,
Yeah.
go through again, pick different choices. I just think like that concept is so amazing. As a kid, I was enthralled by choose your own adventure books. I read so many, and there were so many different ones and themes. There was like the one that stands out the most in my mind was Super Mario Bros. 2, except in like a book form.
What
Okay.
was
Um,
Christy?
yeah, it was a choose your own adventure,
No
and so like
way.
it would be like so crazy. It was like, oh, do you like I don't know, stomp this fucking turtle or like shit like that, right? Like it was like playing a video game,
Oh, that's wild.
except in a book form. It was like so good and insane, and that type of reading was just so fascinating. And I think like for me, D&D is almost like that in a lot of ways, where it's
Yeah,
like
I can see that. Yeah.
there, especially if you're using a written scenario, and so like were you like the game that we're playing partially leans on a written scenario, and then there's some different homebrew elements that I brought in as well. But if you're reading the book, it's like, oh yeah, like you can literally do anything, and then someone has written a response to most things, and like, okay, you just kind of see where it takes you. That's like, I don't know, I think that's just super
Cool.
fun. And then I think I read a lot of those books when I was quite young, so probably like grade 2, 3 maybe, and then after that is when I actually started picking up D&D as a kid. So I think that was like a very interesting natural progression into uh, tabletop games and the reading that came along with them. I remember as a kid, like reading the player's handbook was just like I think that was a daunting task for me because in a lot of ways the D&D books are like textbooks. There's like different chapters and they all cover specific topics, but they read and they look almost like textbooks. Um, but as a kid, like that young, we didn't really use a lot of textbooks in school yet. So I think for me, it was like, oh wow, like it's a huge like tome of fantastical knowledge. And I was just always super excited to, like open it up and see what was inside. It was a very cool experience for me to be reading. Well, I guess it was 3.5e Player's Handbook at that time. It's like super fascinating. Um, but yeah, I think the more I read D&D books, the more D&D books I want to buy. Though that's like a big, I don't know.
Money
You're getting sucked in.
Yeah, I know. I'm down the rabbit hole now.
Hasbro has you by the
I
balls.
know. Oh God, I'm so glad that they walked back the ODL shit because now I don't feel as bad about potentially started buying books from them. But yeah, I don't know. I just think it's like there's so many different cool stories that they put out, and it's like I may never get to run this, but I want to have it to just read myself, and then
Yeah.
potentially have the chance to run it. It's like it's the stories contained within are just like really fascinating, and
I
even
mean,
reading
I've
through.
been having a good time so far. Like, especially honestly, the stuff we did last week, like your home
Yeah,
stuff. Like, I've really enjoyed that stuff.
yeah. So I think like I don't know. For me, reading has always kind of been very connected to writing as well. And so being able to kind of turn the reading into the writing in that sense is really cool. Um, I definitely know that as a kid, reading so much made me a far better writer than any sort of schoolwork did.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really learn anything in school about how to write. It was all from just reading books and studying how authors wrote and the styles in which they wrote, and then kind of developing a voice in that way. But yeah, D&D is a kind of phenomenal example and exercise in reading and writing and how those two things really connect as well. What about y'all? Do you kind of I don't know, has reading affected your writing? Do you feel?
Feel not to maybe that extent. I don't write for fun. Something.
I mean, even just like for
When I
school
do,
things.
yeah. I I'm just trying to think back on like my schoolwork. I definitely write based on who I am as a person, and that's affected by things I've read. But I don't feel that when I'm writing, especially schoolwork, which is nonfiction, I'm primarily writing with like a voice or something, just getting my thoughts on paper.
Yeah. But I mean, like even reading like nonfiction kind of, I think that really affected the way that I do write. Like reading a lot of academic things kind of pushed
Mm,
me into the academic style of writing as well. Um,
mm.
like I don't know, even through high school, I was reading again like a lot of nonfiction things as well. But I
When
think
when you say nonfiction, I'm thinking about like the like the l-
Biographies.
like like how turtles live. Like
Oh,
from birth to death, like their life
oh
that's
cycle.
the one. That's the
When
audience
when
well,
should
you
think of.
say nonfiction, that's what my head goes to. Obviously, it means current events, world news, all that is also nonfiction.
yeah,
But my head always jumps to
Sure.
yeah. I know what you're saying like, but
yeah, yeah,
I read
That's pretty
nonfiction
funny
too
though.
in high school, but it wasn't news. It was you know
Turtles.
I read a lot of like National Geographic,
yeah.
like
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah.
the magazines or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like in magazines, especially back in the day, they were written
Hmm.
quite well.
Yeah.
And so things like that did also contribute. But
Yeah. No, not to get into the whole rabbit hole, but I feel like journalism was definitely did
on
better
the
back
decline,
then.
yeah, journalism's having a rough go of it right now. And
Yeah.
I'm fueling it, reading all the online articles.
Unbelievable.
I
As
know.
long as
Thank
you're reading
God.
the right place. I mean, at least for me, like similar to Sar, but also similar to Yuka, like there is a disconnect in like reading fiction and then my reading, but overall reading has definitely helped me with my vocabulary and
Mhm,
English as a whole.
mhm.
But I, because in school I wrote a lot of research papers, so like
Yeah.
I had to read a lot of articles, obviously, but like it was more uh how to, I guess, phrase and support an argument for
Yeah.
me, right? And I I guess nonfiction helped me there, but fiction would definitely not lend itself in
Mhm.
that criteria,
Interesting.
right?
I feel like even reading fiction did help me with my writing, honestly.
Maybe.
When I was young, I loved to write stories as well. And so reading fiction helped me write those stories and just kind of helped me develop, um, I don't know, a good sense of like flow and different things like that. I,
Hmm.
I think, okay, and this is, I don't know, I'm kind of reverting back to being an editor and a or reader of many things. But flow is one of the most important things for me with writing.
No,
If
yeah, I
something
definitely
doesn't
agree.
flow nicely, it's like I I don't want to read it. You know, like for
Hmm.
me, the readability goes down a lot, and so I think fiction really does help with that.
Yeah,
Understanding how kind of beginning, middle, end, even like just the very basics of it, like how that comes into play and how that's put into words was like brilliant for me in terms of learning how to write cohesive paragraphs, right? Things like that.
yeah.
Um,
Now that you like phrase it that way, I
yeah,
I can see it, right? Because like I would rather write and support my arguments better if it flowed than like just have a list
yeah.
for whoever's reading that shit, right?
Mhm.
So we're coming
Okay.
up on time, but we thought it'd be, a funny haha idea if we just
Yeah.
gave
Yep.
y'all some
I
book
don't look at the author.
recommendations.
I don't look at the author of
Yeah,
this
yeah.
book.
I mean, I can start
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I got my stuff ready.
Yeah.
So,
Why don't you? Just start.
um, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a tough pick for me. It wouldn't really be like a top three list. It's just a fun book or like some books for you guys to check out. The first one I was talking a bit to Sar about on the break, and it was a book that I discovered during my not a book club kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
called The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, which came out in 2018. It's a fairly new book, but I think it's a very intriguing mystery thriller kind of novel where it's about this man who lives, I would guess, seven different lives all in the same day,
Mm.
and it's up to him to piece together what really happened. the The end of the book kind of gets a bit weirder, but I think the author just did a really good job of kind of writing those lives, those different personalities, because you can see uh the main character's like personality in those like seven people, but like you can also
Yeah.
see very distinct traits that pull the main character against like what he wants to do, right? For example, like one guy was like a fat gluttonous rich man, and
Mm.
obviously he had the physical limitations of being fat and not being able to be very mobile, but like also his tendencies of like overeating or being lecherous or something like that.
Mm.
So that's one. And another one just for more hee hee haha is Sun and Steel by Yukio Mishima, which is a, I guess, autobiography by a very controversial figure, I would say. He's an interesting guy. You should look him up.
Yeah.
But it's not it's it just goes through his life and how he decided to kind of work on himself,
Mm.
um from being like a frail skinny boy to, something more masculine.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too in depth about it, but yeah, it's a good read.
Mm. Sorry.
No,
Any
you go. You go.
recommendations? All right. The book I'm going to recommend was actually recommended to me by Grace, and I read it, and I was like, "Wow, this is such a good book." And it's called "When Breath Becomes Air." It's pretty famous now. "When Breath Becomes Air" by Paul Kalanithi, and this is an autobiography about uh, this man who's a neurosurgery resident, and he gets diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and pretty much details the end of his life as someone who works, in medicine with dealing with people who are potentially facing um, the end of their lives or completely life altering moments. And so it's a very poignant piece. He's a phenomenal writer. I think he was considering becoming an English literature PhD, but decided to go to medical school instead. So he's
Mm.
a phenomenal writer, and yeah, it's just a very, very humanistic story. Intense, but beautiful.
Um, I don't know. I feel like I was a big fan of a lot of book series as a kid, right? And then
Mhm.
there was that kind of gap. So before the gap in high school, I really enjoyed um, the Ranger's Apprentice book series, or even the Percy Jackson one, which I'd,
Mm.
I'd recommend to you know younger mid-teens. But in recent years, I found myself. I remember I read Dune in 2 nights. Just like
Wow.
there's like book one, book two in it, and I I only decided to stop because I found that there was a book two, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll call it here. It's 4 a.m. I'll stop. I I really did enjoy it. The first half of the movie just came out, which covers most of book one. But again, I was telling Josh this during our break where I I read Lord of the Rings 2, and I was bashing a bit on the beginning, but if you saw the movie and you saw the party, you could just like skip that part too if you want, or read into it. But the book also has quite a few things that aren't um, put onto the big screen, so you are missing a bit of what Tolkien did right in the book. So I recommend kind of that for fantasy. Or Dune, I guess, is also like a sci-fi fantasy. I'm a very big fantasy enjoyer.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
actually had another good recommendation from my sister, but I can't remember the book at this time. So, or I know Ender's Game also was a movie. I didn't watch the movie, but I read the book. I
Books are
I
good.
put the yeah, it's I put the age for it is like a bit younger than where we are now, like early 20s, late teens.
Uh-huh.
But it's also a good book.
Mhm.
Mhm.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in to episode 8 of the Up and Up podcast. Next week, we may or may not have a guest.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just keep on tuning in. Thanks, everyone, for listening to us for the last 2 months, and we're going to keep it going. All right. See you
Alright.
later.
So yeah.
Bye.